My fiancé said I'm not tagging you in this success post. It would dilute my personal brand, I replied Kay. Later, I discovered that her entire brand was built on stealing my plan. I, 35 male, am a furniture maker. For 5 years, I thought my girlfriend and I were building a future together. I just didn't realize she was building it on the foundations of my own ruin. There's a certain language that wood speaks a silent vocabulary in the grain and texture that tells a story of seasons of struggle and of slow, steady growth. My workshop was my sanctuary, the one place where that language was all that mattered. The scent of cedar and fresh sawdust was the air I was meant to breathe, and the rhythmic scrape of a handplane against a plank of walnut was the only music my soul ever truly needed. On that particular afternoon, a Tuesday, I believe, the late sun slanted through the high, dusty windows, illuminating the fine particles dancing in the air like constellations. I was working on a piece that was more heart than furniture, an armchair carved from a single magnificent piece of dark walnut. The design was my own, something I'd sketched in the margins of a notebook for months. It was a fluid, organic shape that defied traditional carpentry, and bringing it to life felt less like construction and more like a conversation with the wood itself. My hands, calloused and mapped, with the fine lines of 1,000 tiny cuts, moved with a certainty that my mind rarely possessed outside of these 4 walls. They knew the precise pressure to apply to the chisel, the exact angle to hold the sander. This chair wasn't for a client, it was for me, for us, a testament to a future I was so carefully, lovingly crafting. The heavy workshop door creaked open, and the spell was broken. Chloe stood framed in the doorway, a stark, beautiful contrast to the organized chaos of my world. She was sleek, polished, a figure of modern ambition in tailored slacks and a silk blouse that seemed to repel the very sawdust in the air. In her hand, her phone was a black, glossy rectangle, an extension of her will. "Still playing with your blocks, I see," she said. Her voice was light, a playful melody that always seemed to have a faint, dissonant note underneath. I smiled, wiping a sheen of sweat from my brow with the back of my arm. "It's a bit more complicated than that. Come see." I gestured to the chair, my voice filled with a pride I couldn't contain. "The joinery on this armrest is, well, I think it's the best I've ever done." She walked over her heels, clicking on the concrete floor. She didn't look at the chair, not really. Her eyes glanced over it, but her attention was on the screen in her hand. Her perfectly manicured thumb, a shade of deep crimson, swiped rapidly across the glass. It was a different kind of craftsmanship, I supposed. My hands were stained with wood finish and hard work. Hers were pristine instruments of communication and commerce. "That's nice, honey," she murmured, her focus still elsewhere. "Listen, I just landed the Peterson account, the boutique hotel downtown. They want 50 side tables. 50. Can you imagine the exposure?" My heart sank a little. 50, Chloe, that's a factory order. I'm a one-man operation. "And a brilliant one," she said finally, looking up at me, her eyes bright with a persuasive energy I found impossible to resist. "We can hire some help temporarily. Liam, this is our big break. Their deadline is tight, just 2 months, but the payout is enormous. It would be enough to finally put a down payment on that house we looked at." The house. It was her dream, a modern, minimalist structure of glass and steel that was the architectural opposite of my warm wooden world. But I loved her, and so I wanted to love her dream too. I looked from her expectant face to the half-finished armchair, my armchair. It felt like a living thing, a piece of my own quiet ambition. To take on an order of 50 identical soulless tables would mean shelving this project, maybe for good. It would mean turning my sanctuary into a production line. "I don't know," I said slowly, running a hand over the smooth, curved wood of the chair. "This piece, it's important to me. I was hoping to finish it for the design exhibition next month." Chloe sighed, a soft, carefully calibrated sound of disappointment. She stepped closer, placing her cool, smooth hand on my dusty one. She looked from my face to the chair and back again, a calculated expression of understanding on her features. "I know it is, my love, and it's beautiful, truly. But let's be realistic." She paused, letting the weight of the word settle between us. "My love art doesn't pay the bill. Our future does." And there it was, the argument that always won. Our future. A future she painted so vividly, so enticingly, that it made my own smaller, quieter dreams seem selfish and impractical. I looked at her, at the unwavering confidence in her eyes, and felt my own resolve crumble. She was the practical one, the visionary. I was just the hand. What was one chair, one exhibition compared to a whole house, a whole life together? "Okay," I heard myself say. "For us. For the house." Her face lit up with a triumphant, dazzling smile. "I knew you'd understand. You're the best." She gave me a quick, dry kiss, careful not to smudge her lipstick. "I'll draw up a contract and a production schedule. We'll be a power couple." She turned and walked away, already tapping furiously into her phone, her mind miles ahead, orchestrating a future I was beginning to feel I had less and less say in. I stood there for a long time, the scent of walnut mingling with the faint, expensive trace of her perfume. I looked at my hands, then at the chair. A sense of loss, small but sharp, pricked at me. I told myself it was just the stress of a big decision. I told myself she was right. It was a necessary sacrifice. I was building our future. I just didn't realize I was using the pieces of my own dreams as the raw material. Later that evening, as I was closing up the workshop, Maya, Chloe's roommate, came home. She was an accountant, a woman who lived in a world of numbers and quiet certainty. She gave me a small, shy smile as she passed the open door. Her eyes lingered for a moment on the abandoned armchair in the center of the room, before she gave me a brief nod and disappeared inside the house. It was a fleeting, silent exchange, but I remember feeling for just a second that she had seen something no one else had. She had seen the conversation the wood and I were having, and she knew it had just been interrupted. 2 weeks passed in a flurry of sawdust and sleepless nights. The 50 side tables for the Peterson account became my entire world. My workshop, once a place of creation, now felt more like a factory floor. I hired 2 temporary assistants, and the quiet conversation between my chisel and the wood was replaced by the constant industrial scream of power saws and sanders. I barely saw Chloe. She was a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and fabric swatches, her life accelerating onto a new corporate plane, while mine was a loop of cutting, sanding, and finishing. We were a team, she said, partners in a rapidly growing enterprise. I clung to that idea, repeating it to myself over the roar of the machinery. It was the only way to make the sacrifice of my own art feel worthwhile. The day we delivered the final table was a Friday. The project was completed ahead of schedule, a fact Chloe celebrated with a triumphant post on her professional social media, complete with a smiling picture of herself in the new hotel lobby. She tagged the hotel, the photographer, and the interior design magazine she was courting. She did not tag me. That evening, I decided was the time. The check from the Peterson account had cleared a staggering amount of money that made the dream of the glass and steel house a tangible reality. The exhaustion of the past weeks felt like a worthy investment. I wanted to reclaim the part of us that had gotten lost in the business. I spent the afternoon cooking. Not just a simple meal, but an elaborate one-seared scallops, a risotto that required a full hour of patient stirring, a bottle of wine that had cost a small fortune. I set the table with the good plates, the ones we never used, and lit candles, letting their soft, flickering light chase the harsh angles out of our minimalist living room. When Chloe arrived home, she paused in the doorway, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "What's all this?" she asked, a note of suspicion in her voice. "A celebration," I said, my smile feeling wider and more genuine than it had in a long time. "We did it. You did it. You landed the account, and we delivered. To us." I raised my glass. She offered a faint, distracted smile and put her briefcase down. "It was a huge success," she agreed, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for something out of place. "The hotel manager is already talking about a second phase for the suites upstairs." We ate, but the conversation felt stilted. I talked about the beauty of the wood we had used, the challenges of matching the grain across 50 pieces. She talked about leveraging the Peterson success into a higher tier of client, about branding, about market penetration. It felt less like a celebration between lovers and more like a quarterly review between a CEO and a production manager. Still, I held on to my plan. The wine, the food, the candlelight, I hoped they would slowly melt her corporate armor and bring back the woman I had fallen in love with. After dinner, we sat on the sofa, the city lights twinkling through the large window. The moment felt right. The noise of the past few weeks had faded, replaced by a fragile quiet. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "Chloe." I began, my voice a little unsteady. "These last few weeks have been crazy, and I feel like we've been running on parallel tracks. I want us to be on the same track again. I want to build more than just a business with you." My hand drifted toward my pocket, where the small velvet box felt as heavy as a stone. My fingers brushed against the fabric, and I began to pull it out. "I need to stop you right there, Liam," she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was something far worse, neutral. It was calm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion, as if she were about to deliver a piece of unwelcome but necessary feedback on a project. My hand froze. She took a small, deliberate sip of her wine, placed the glass on the coaster with a soft click, and then turned to face me fully. Her expression was serene. "Our paths are diverging," she stated, as if quoting from a business textbook. "My career is entering a new phase, one that requires a level of agility and networking that our current dynamic doesn't support. I've been reevaluating my personal brand, and I need to optimize for personal and professional growth." The words were absurd, a meaningless jumble of corporate jargon, yet their meaning was brutally, devastatingly clear. I stared at her, trying to find a flicker of sadness, of regret, of anything that resembled the woman who had once traced the lines on my calloused hands and called them beautiful. I found nothing. "I've decided that it's in our best mutual interest to dissolve our personal partnership," she continued, her voice maintaining its placid, even keel. "I'm moving out. I've already signed a lease on a new apartment closer to the design district. It's a more strategic location for me." The air in the room grew thin, hard to breathe. The risotto I had so carefully stirred sat like a knot in my stomach. The candlelight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that suddenly looked menacing. She had this all planned, the timing, the speech. This wasn't a decision made in the heat of a moment. It was an agenda item she was now checking off her list. I said nothing. My mind was a white void of static. My hand was still in my pocket, my fingers now clenched tightly around the ring box. She seemed to take my silence as an agreement. She stood up, smoothing down her slacks. I hope you can see this is a logical, practical decision for both of us. It's not personal. She looked at me then, a flicker of something that might have been pity in her eyes, though it was probably just impatience. She offered a small, placating smile. But we'll always be friends, though. The offer hung in the air, grotesque in its generosity. It was not an offer of comfort. It was a business proposal. It was a way for her to retain access to the workshop, to the hands that built her vision, without the inconvenient baggage of a relationship. She picked up her briefcase. I'll have movers pick up my things on Sunday. I'll text you the details. And with that, she walked to the door, her steps confident and sure. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing in the profound, crushing silence she left behind. I sat there for a long time. I don't know how long. The candles burned down their flames, sputtering in pools of wax. The city lights outside blurred into a meaningless smear. My hand slowly came out of my pocket, and I looked at the small velvet box, a future neatly packaged that had just been declared obsolete. The first week after she left was a blur of profound silence. The house, once filled with the energy of her ambition, now felt cavernously empty. The second week was a fog of grief. I'd wake up, make coffee, and stare at the untouched armchair in my workshop, a monument to a future that had been cancelled. Work was impossible. The scent of wood, once a comfort, now smelled like ashes. I was adrift, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly, utterly lost. It was Maya who anchored me. She never offered platitudes or easy reassurances. Instead, she offered presence. She'd leave a plate of food outside my door in the evening. Sometimes we'd sit in the living room together, not speaking, simply sharing the quiet space. Her companionship was an unobtrusive, steadying force. As an accountant, her world was one of logic and balance sheet, and I think the sheer illogical nature of my heartbreak was something she felt compelled to observe, if not solve. The shift began on a Saturday morning, nearly 3 weeks after the breakup. Chloe sent Maya a curt email asking her to find a file on the old desktop computer she'd left behind and forward it to her. The file was labeled Chloe Design 5-Year Plan. She says it's urgent. Maya told me, a slight frown on her face. Something about a presentation to a new investor. I just shrugged the name Chloe, sending a familiar dull ache through my chest. You can go ahead, I don't mind. I was in the kitchen staring into a coffee cup that had long gone cold when Maya came in. She was holding a printout of a single page, her expression unreadable. Liam, she began, her voice unusually hesitant. I'm sorry, I know this is none of my business, but when I opened the file to attach it, I saw the financial. She slid the paper onto the table. It was a projected profit and loss statement. I recognized the numbers instantly. They were my numbers. My material costs, my labor hours, my projected revenue from the Peterson account, and 2 other major clients I had secured last year. This isn't a plan for a new business, Maya said softly, her eyes meeting mine. They were filled not with pity, but with a sharp, professional concern. This is a hostile takeover plan for an existing one, yours. The fog in my mind began to clear, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. It was one thing to be left. It was another entirely to be gutted. The breakup wasn't an ending. It was a business transaction. A hostile CEO removing a partner she deemed redundant. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place the next day. Chloe called, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She had a few last boxes of books in the garage, and the movers had forgotten them. Could I possibly be a dear and drop them off at her new place? It would mean the world to her, she said, for the sake of their friendship. The word, once a cruel joke, now sounded like a weapon. Fueled by a new chilling suspicion, I agreed. The boxes were heavy, filled with art history tomes and design encyclopedias. As I was loading the last one into my truck, the cardboard flap tore and a few books tumbled out. One of them was a leather-bound sketchbook, my sketchbook, a gift I had given her on our first anniversary. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The first 20 pages were, as I remembered, filled with my own excited, chaotic sketches of early designs, notes on wood types, dreams committed to paper. Then the style changed. The pencil sketches gave way to neat, precise ink. It was Chloe's handwriting. The pages were filled with a meticulous, ruthless strategy. There were lists of my clients with notes next to their names. Easy to flip, loyal to Liam, approach with caution, offer 30% discount. There were drafts of her new company's logo, a sleek stylized C that looked eerily similar to the maker's mark I burned into my own furniture. The final pages contained handwritten notes from meetings with a man named Marcus, detailing how his investment would be used to launch a marketing campaign the moment she secured the assets, my design. The warmth of the afternoon sun felt impossibly cold. I sat on the tailgate of my truck, the evidence of her premeditated betrayal lying open in my hand. This wasn't a heartbreak. This was a heist. That evening, there was a knock on the door. It was an older man, his face weathered and kind, his hands as calloused as my own. It took me a moment to place him. It was Arthur, Chloe's estranged father, a retired cabinet maker I had met only twice in 5 years. He had a small, canvas-wrapped parcel in his hands. "Heard about what happened," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Figured you could use this more than she ever would." He handed me the parcel. It was his old journal filled with decades of woodworking techniques, complex joinery, and finishing secrets. We sat in my workshop, the scent of wood a shared language between us. He didn't speak ill of his daughter, not directly. He just looked at the abandoned armchair with a deep, sad wisdom in his eyes. "She always wanted the fruit without the labor," he said, his gaze distant. "Always wanted to be the architect, never the builder. Be careful, son. Don't let her take your labor too." After he left, I sat in the silent workshop for hours, the 2 books spread before me on my workbench, Chloe's ledger of betrayal and Arthur's legacy of true craftsmanship. The grief was gone, burned away by a cold, clarifying anger. My sanctuary had been marked for demolition, my life's work targeted for plunder. She had underestimated me. She saw a heartbroken artist, a man too lost in sawdust to see the world clearly. She didn't see the builder who understood better than anyone that before you can create something new, you must first take precise, careful measurement. I picked up my phone, my movements now deliberate and steady. I didn't call her. I didn't call a friend. I looked up the number for the best intellectual property lawyer in the city, and I made the call. The conversation I was about to have with the wood was over. A new one was about to begin. The months leading up to the National Design Exhibition were the quietest of my life. On the surface, I was the heartbroken ex-boyfriend, a man nursing his wounds in the solitude of his workshop. I politely declined Chloe's occasional cheerful texts, asking for a friend's advice on a technical drawing. I let the narrative she was carefully crafting of her own brilliant solo ascent build without interruption. In reality, my workshop had become a war room. My evenings were spent not with wood, but with my lawyer, a sharp, meticulous man named Davies. We pored over documents, filed patents, and constructed a legal fortress around the work Chloe believed she was stealing. The key to it all was a gift from the past. In Arthur's old journal, I found a diagram for a complex interlocking dovetail joint, a piece of old-world artistry so unique it was practically a signature. It was beautiful, strong, and fiendishly difficult to execute without a specific set of custom tools and a deep understanding of wood tension. I spent weeks mastering it, then incorporated it as the central load-bearing feature in a new flagship design for a console table. I knew with absolute certainty that Chloe had stolen the digital file for the design. I also knew she possessed only the image, not the knowledge. The joint was my Trojan horse. We filed a design patent for it, patent number 7B349. It was a dry technical document, but to me it was a poem. The day of the exhibition arrived a crisp, bright Saturday. The convention center was a cavern of noise and ambition, a stark contrast to the quiet focus of my workshop. Every major designer and firm had a booth, each one a polished shrine to modern aesthetics. And then there was Chloe. It was the largest, the most ostentatious, a gleaming white space dominated by massive backlit photos of her face. And in the center on a raised platform stood the console table, my console table. Maya was by my side, a calm, steadying presence. We were not there as vengeful exes. We were there as business people dressed in quiet, professional attire. We blended into the crowd, watching from a distance as Chloe held court. She was radiant, a star in her own orbit. She moved with a liquid grace, her voice a confident, charming melody, as she explained the philosophy behind her collection to a group of rapt onlookers. Her investor, a slick, silver-haired man named Marcus, stood beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The climax of the event was the announcement of the Vanguard Partnership, a lucrative contract with the prestigious Sterling Hotel Group to furnish their new line of luxury suites. The CEO of Sterling, a formidable woman in her 60s, stood beside Chloe at a small podium, a contract and a pen laid out before them. Cameras flashed, the crowd pressed in. With her bold vision and uncompromising commitment to quality, Chloe Vance is precisely the kind of talent that will define the next generation of design, the CEO announced. We are thrilled to embark on this journey with her. Chloe beamed her smile, a perfect polished thing. She picked up the pen. This was her moment of coronation. From the edge of the crowd, I saw my lawyer, Mr. Davies, begin to move. He didn't rush. He walked with a calm, deliberate pace, his leather briefcase held neatly in one hand. He navigated the crowd with a polite, "Excuse me." His quiet progress, an unstoppable tide against the flow of excitement. He reached the podium just as Chloe's pen touched the paper. "Excuse me, Ms. Vance." Davies said, his voice perfectly modulated, not loud, but carrying with an undeniable authority. "Mr. Liam Thorne asked me to give you this before you sign anything." Chloe looked up, her smile faltering, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Marcus stepped forward. "Who are you? This is a private event." Davies ignored him, his focus entirely on Chloe. He placed his briefcase on the corner of the podium and opened it, retrieving a thick, bound document. He laid it on top of the hotel contract. "This is a cease and desist order," he said calmly, "and a notice of pending litigation for copyright and patent infringement." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Chloe forced a laugh, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "This is absurd. It's a pathetic stunt from a bitter ex-boyfriend." She looked at the sterling CEO with an apologetic smile. "I am so sorry about this interruption." The CEO, however, was not smiling. She was looking at Davies, her expression sharp and discerning. "Thamambal," Davies said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We are not here to debate aesthetics. We are here to discuss patent number 7B349. He tapped a specific page in the document. "It pertains to the unique interlocking joint mechanism used in the central console table you are about to commission. A patent filed by my client 6 months ago, and a technique for which he holds exclusive manufacturing rights." The color drained from Chloe's face. Her eyes darted from Davies to the table to Marcus, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Furthermore, Davies continued, his tone relentless. "We have digital watermarks embedded in the design files Ms. Vance is using, proving they originated on my client's server. We also have as evidence of premeditated intent Ms. Vance's own handwritten notes from a personal sketchbook, detailing her plan to appropriate Mr. Thorne's client list and designs." The silence in the booth was now absolute, a vacuum where all the air had been sucked out. The flashes of the cameras seemed to intensify, capturing not a moment of triumph but of utter public devastation. Marcus dropped his hand from Chloe's back, as if her skin had suddenly become molten lava. The sterling CEO slowly, deliberately pulled the contract back, her face a mask of cold fury. Chloe just stood there, the pen still in her hand, her perfect smile frozen into a grotesque rictus of shock. She had wanted to be the architect, but had never learned how a foundation is built. And in that one silent, shattering moment, she was finally forced to witness the spectacular collapse of the entire beautiful hollow structure she had built upon a lie. I didn't stay to watch the rest. There was no satisfaction in it, only a grim sense of finality. Maya gently touched my arm, and we turned and walked away, melting back into the anonymous crowd, leaving the chaos and the whispers behind us. The incision had been made. The rest was simply letting the poison drain out. In the age of instant information, a vacuum is the most dangerous thing of all. The story of the confrontation at the exhibition spread through the design world like a digital wildfire. The initial blog posts were a flurry of sensational headlines, and blurry cell phone videos filled with speculation. Who was right? Who was wrong? It was a classic he said, she said narrative, and in the absence of hard facts, public opinion tends to side with the more compelling storyteller. Chloe, I had to admit, had always been a masterful storyteller. She waited 2 days, allowing the speculation to reach a fever pitch. Then she made her move. It wasn't a press release or a statement through a lawyer. It was far more modern, far more insidious. She went live on Instagram. She didn't appear from a sterile office, but from a softly lit room, sitting on a plush sofa. She wore a simple white sweater, her makeup was minimal, and her eyes were red-rimmed as if she had been crying for 48 hours straight. It was a perfectly staged portrait of a victim. I watched it from my own sofa, Maya sitting silently beside me. Chloe spoke for 22 minutes, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. She never mentioned the patent or the sketchbook. Instead, she spoke of a 5-year relationship with a man she described as brilliantly talented but deeply insecure. She painted me as a controlling partner, someone who had been unnerved by her ambition and success. He couldn't stand to see me succeed on my own terms, she said, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. When I finally found the courage to leave a toxic and stifling relationship to build my own brand, he couldn't handle it. This lawsuit, it's not about a piece of furniture. It's an act of professional intimidation. It's a classic tactic used to silence a female entrepreneur who dared to step out of a man's shadow. The comments scrolling up the side of the screen were a torrent of support. Hearts and praying hands emojis flooded the feed. "We believe you," one wrote. "Stay strong, queen," said another. She was brilliant. She had reframed a clear-cut case of intellectual property theft into a poignant drama about toxic masculinity and female empowerment. She wasn't a thief, she was a martyr. Maya watched the screen, her expression unreadable. When the live stream ended, she turned to me. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, and to my own surprise, it was true. The man from a month ago would have been destroyed by her words, by the public vitriol, but the man I was now simply felt a profound, weary disappointment. It was all so predictable. "It's just noise," I said. "The truth is quiet." "Then maybe we should give it a voice," Maya replied. While Chloe was busy performing for her audience, Maya was at her computer. She worked with the quiet, methodical precision of the accountant she was. She didn't assemble an emotional plea, she assembled a case file. She scanned the most damning pages from the sketchbook, The client lists the financial projections using my costing, the notes about her exit strategy. She attached Chloe's own 5-year plan document. She compiled a simple, clear timeline of events, cross-referencing dates from the sketchbook with the date the Peterson account was landed and the date of our break. She placed it all into a single password-protected PDF file. It was a cold, irrefutable narrative of facts. She didn't leak it to a gossip blog or a tabloid. She sent one single email to an address she had found after hours of research. It belonged to Eleanor Vance, no relation to Chloe, a veteran investigative journalist for a highly respected trade publication, a woman in her late 60s, with a reputation for surgical precision and a disdain for social media drama. Maya's email was brief and professional. It read, "Dear Ms. Vance, I am a third party with access to documents that provide critical context to the recent events at the National Design Exhibition involving Chloe Vance and Liam Thorne. I believe you may find them relevant to your reporting. The file is attached. The password is integrity." 3 days passed. Chloe's victim narrative continued to dominate the conversation. She was interviewed by a popular design podcast where she tearfully recounted her struggle. My own social media was a wasteland of hateful comments. Through it all, on the advice of my lawyer, I remained completely silent. Then, on Wednesday morning, Eleanor Vance's article was published. It was the lead story on the publication's website. The headline was simple and devastating: "Ambition and Appropriation, the Evidence Behind the Vance-Thorne Dispute." The article was a masterwork of journalistic precision. It didn't editorialize or moralize. It simply laid out the facts. It began by acknowledging Chloe's public claims, then systematically dismantled them, one piece of evidence at a time. It included high-resolution scans of the sketchbook pages. It quoted from her business plan. The journalist had even cross-referenced the dates and confirmed that Chloe had registered her new company 3 full months before our relationship had ended. The most cutting paragraph was near the end. "While Ms. Chloe Vance has publicly framed herself as the victim of a broken heart and a man's bruised ego, Eleanor wrote the documents reviewed for this story tell a different tale, that of a cold, calculated business plan, years in the making. It is a story not of passion, but of profit. And the central question is not who left whom, but what exactly was being stolen." The effect was immediate and absolute. The digital tide that had flowed so strongly in her favor reversed with the force of a tsunami. The design podcast that had interviewed her issued a public apology. The supportive comments on her Instagram were replaced by a flood of angry, accusatory ones. The story was no longer about a bitter ex-boyfriend. It was about a fraud who had been caught. Chloe had built a beautiful house of cards, and a quiet, unassailable fact had just acted as a gust of wind. If Eleanor Vance's article was a gust of wind, the days that followed were the collapse of the structure. A house of cards falls not all at once, but in a sequence, each piece knocking down the next. Chloe's carefully constructed world began to dismantle itself in precisely that fashion. The first card to fall was Marcus. I learned about it not from gossip, but from a dry, formal letter from my lawyer. Marcus's investment firm had filed a lawsuit against Chloe for fraud and negligent misrepresentation. He was seeking to recoup his entire initial investment of over $250,000 plus damages. The man who had stood beside her, his hand on her back, in a gesture of ownership, was now the first one to turn on her. It was a brutal, but entirely predictable act of self-preservation. Relationships built on the shaky ground of mutual gain are the first to fracture when the earth begins to tremble. The clients she had worked so hard to poach vanished next. The Sterling Hotel Group issued a public statement announcing they had terminated all discussions with Chloe Vance and were reviewing their internal vetting processes. The statement also included a public apology to me and an invitation to discuss a potential future collaboration. One by one, the other clients followed suit, backing away from the smoldering wreckage of her reputation. Through all this, Chloe was silent. Her social media went dark. There were no more tearful live streams, no more defiant posts. It was as if she had ceased to exist in the digital world she had tried so hard to conquer. I almost felt a sliver of pity for her until the evening she showed up at the house. I was in the workshop when I heard the shouting. I walked into the house to find Maya standing in the living room, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of calm resolve. Chloe stood opposite her, her face a storm of fury. Her perfect composure was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged desperation. She was on her cell phone screaming into it. "You can't do this, Marcus. We had a deal. We were partners." She shrieked, her voice thin and reedy. There was a pause. I could almost hear the cold, indifferent voice on the other end of the line. Chloe's face crumpled. "A high-risk asset. Is that all I was to you? An asset?" Another pause, longer this time. Her body seemed to shrink. "Don't you dare hang up on me." She stared at the phone in her hand for a moment, her expression one of utter disbelief before letting out a guttural scream and hurling it across the room. It shattered against the wall. Then her wild, furious eyes settled on Maya. "This is your fault," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She took a step forward. "You did this. You were always jealous. A sad little bean counter, jealous of anyone with a real vision, a real life." Maya didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her gaze unwavering. "This has nothing to do with jealousy, Chloe." "Don't lie to me," Chloe spat, taking another step. "You couldn't stand to see me happy, to see me building something. So you went behind my back and destroyed it. You ruined my life." "I didn't do anything," Maya replied, her voice still quiet, yet carrying an immense weight of certainty. "I just showed them the truth. The life you were building was on a foundation you stole from someone else. You didn't create a business. You committed a crime." It was the word crime that seemed to break something in Chloe. She lunged forward, her hands reaching for Maya. "You have no idea what you're talking about." I moved, then stepping between them. "Chloe, that's enough," I said, my voice firm. "You need to leave." She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of rage and betrayal. For a second I saw a flash of the woman I once knew, a flicker of vulnerability. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a cold sneer. "Of course," she said with a bitter laugh. "The two of you, the sad little accountant and the glorified carpenter. You deserve each other." She then turned her venom back to Maya. "You're not angry at me, Chloe," Maya said, her voice cutting through the impending tirade. "You're angry at yourself for getting caught. Those are two very different things." That simple psychological truth seemed to shatter Chloe's remaining composure. She let out a wordless cry of frustration and stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard that a picture frame rattled on the wall. We stood in the silence, the broken cell phone, a piece of collateral damage on the floor. Maya was trembling slightly, but her eyes were clear. The next morning, she quietly and methodically filed a police report for harassment and intimidation. A temporary restraining order was granted by that afternoon. It was another dry legal document, but its message was profound. Chloe was no longer welcome here. The last physical link to the life she had tried to steal and the people she had tried to ruin was now legally severed. There was no sense of victory in it. As I sat with Maya that evening, I simply felt a deep, hollow sadness. We were watching the inevitable slow-motion collapse of a person who had valued ambition over everything else, over loyalty, over honesty, and over the basic decency of human connection. Her allies were gone. Her support system was a pile of ashes. She was now truly on her own. The final act of a collapse is often the quietest. After the noise of the lawsuits and the drama of the restraining order, a grim silence settled over Chloe's affair. The legal machinery churned on, indifferent to human emotion. I received updates from Mr. Davies in concise, unemotional emails. Chloe's assets were being liquidated to satisfy the judgment from Marcus's lawsuit. Her new apartment, the one in the strategic location, was given up. The expensive car was repossessed. The brand she had tried to build on a foundation of theft was now nothing more than a series of debts on a legal ledger. I took no pleasure in this. Each update felt less like a victory and more like a final sad accounting. The anger I had felt had long since cooled, leaving behind only the gray ash of regret for the 5 years we had lost. I was busy consumed with rebuilding my own business, and more importantly, with building a new quiet life with Maya. Chloe, for the most part, had faded from our daily lives, becoming a ghost in a cautionary tale. I learned about her final desperate move from Arthur. He called me one evening, about a month after the last of the legal proceedings had concluded. His voice was heavy, filled with a weariness that went beyond his year. He told me Chloe had come to see him. In my mind, I pictured the scene as he described it. She had driven a rented economy car to his small, secluded home in the countryside, a place surrounded by tall pines and the smell of the earth. It was a world away from the glass and steel she craved. His workshop, where he still spent his days carving intricate wooden birds, was a place of deep, unhurried peace. It was a sanctuary of honest work, and into this sanctuary she had brought her storm. She arrived unannounced, looking thinner, her expensive clothes slightly rumpled, her face etched with attention that no amount of makeup could hide. She didn't begin with an apology, Arthur told me. She began with a litany of grievances. She spoke of a world that was against her, of jealous rivals, meaning me, and treacherous friends, meaning Maya. She recounted the story of her downfall, not as a series of consequences for her own action, but as a conspiracy orchestrated against her. Arthur listened, his hands busy with a piece of sandpaper on a half-finished hawk. He let her talk for nearly an hour, letting the poison and the self-pity pour out of her, until she was finally exhausted, her voice hoarse. Only then, in the silence that followed, did she finally state her true purpose. She needed money, a substantial amount, she said, to pay off her remaining legal fees and to start over somewhere new. She framed it not as a handout, but as a loan, an investment in her inevitable comeback. When she was finished, Arthur set down his carving. He looked at her, truly, looked at her for a long moment. Then, as he told me on the phone, he did something simple. He held up his own hands, the hands of a man who had spoken the language of wood for over 60 years. They were gnarled, scarred, the knuckles swollen with arthritis, but they were strong, capable hands that had built a life of integrity. Then he looked at her hands, which were resting on his workbench. They were soft, unblemished, the nails still neat. They were the hands of an architect who had never touched the stone. Your grandfather Arthur, said his voice, a low, gravelly thing, built this house with his own hands. He taught me that what you build with integrity, no storm can ever truly wash away. Chloe stared at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and impatience. I don't have time for a history lesson, Dad. I need your help. I know what you need, he replied, his voice gentle but firm, but it's not something I can give you. He looked from her hands back to his own. The contrast was a story in itself. I watched you grow up, so much talent, so much fire. But you were always in a hurry. You wanted the beautiful finished thing, but you had no respect for the process, for the slow, hard work of making it real. You didn't just try to steal from that boy Liam. You tried to steal his labor, his time, his very heart. You tried to take the thing he built with integrity and put your name on it. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, but these were not the performative tears of her Instagram video. These were hot, real tears of frustration and dawning despair. So you're taking his side. There are no sides. Arthur said, his voice filled with a profound paternal sadness. There is only what is true. I cannot help you build another house on a rotten foundation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, worn leather wallet. He took out all the cash, he had a few $100s, and placed it on the workbench. This I can give you, he said softly. This is money. But honor, no. That is something you have to earn for yourself. And it's the one thing you've thrown away. That, he told me, was the moment she finally broke. She didn't scream or argue. All the fight seemed to drain out of her at once, leaving behind a hollow, defeated shell. She looked at the money on the workbench, then at her father's sad, unwavering eyes, and for the first time she had nothing to say. She couldn't manipulate him. She couldn't charm him. She couldn't bully him. She could only stand there exposed in the harsh, honest light of her father's simple truth. She didn't take the money. She turned wordlessly and walked out of the workshop, out of his life. It wasn't the loss of the business, the lawsuits, or the public shaming that was her true rock bottom. It was this. It was standing before the legacy she came from, and being forced to see in the quiet disappointment of her own father the reflection of a person she had become. It is often said that time heals all wounds. I don't believe that's entirely true. Some wounds leave scars, and those scars serve as reminders. I think perhaps that time doesn't heal so much as it teaches. It teaches you what is strong enough to endure, and what was destined to crumble all along. 1 year passed, the seasons turned, and with them the pages of my own life. My business, Thorncraft, didn't just recover, it thrived. The story of what had happened at the exhibition, once a scandal, had become something of a legend in the design community. It became a story about integrity, about the value of true craftsmanship. The invitation from the Sterling Hotel Group turned into a major commission, but this time it was on my own term. There were no soulless, mass-produced tables. Instead, I was commissioned to create 100 unique signature pieces for their most exclusive suites. The work was challenging, fulfilling, and it paid off the last of my business debts, leaving me for the first time truly free. Maya and I became partners in every sense of the word. Her sharp, logical mind was the perfect complement to my creative one. She managed the finances, the client relations, the entire business side of things with a quiet competence that allowed me to retreat back into my sanctuary, the workshop, and simply create. Our love was like that too. It wasn't a whirlwind of high drama and grand pronouncements. It was a slow, sturdy construction built on a foundation of shared respect, quiet understanding, and the easy comfort of two people who had seen each other at their worst and decided to build something better together. I saw Chloe once during that year. It was by chance. I was driving through a suburb on the other side of the city, picking up a rare type of lumber when I saw her. She was working at a large generic home goods chain store, the kind of place that sells flat-pack furniture and disposable decor. She was wearing the store's bright orange polo shirt, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She was helping a couple load a large cardboard box into their car. Her movements were mechanical, her smile weary and thin. Our eyes met for a fleeting second across the sprawling parking lot. There was no anger in her gaze, no fire. There was just a vast, empty exhaustion. I didn't feel a surge of victory or satisfaction. I just felt a quiet, profound sadness for the brilliant, burning light she had allowed to be extinguished by her own greed. I drove on and did not look back. Life moved forward. The workshop was expanded, a new, larger space with better light, but it still held the familiar scent of cedar and walnut. I had 2 apprentices now, young, eager artisans whom I was teaching not just the techniques from Arthur's journal, but the philosophy behind them. The work was joyful again. One evening, I was standing at my old drafting table, a pencil in my hand. The workshop was quiet, the day's work done. Maya came in holding 2 mugs of coffee and stood beside me, her warmth a familiar comfort. She looked down at the large sheet of paper spread before me. On it, rendered in clean, confident lines, was the final design for an armchair. It was the one. The fluid, organic shape, the intricate, interlocking joinery of the armrests, the elegant curve of the back. It was the piece of my heart I had been forced to abandon all that time ago. Yes, it's beautiful, Liam, Maya said softly, her fingers gently tracing the lines on the paper. It's the best thing you've ever designed. I looked at it, and for the first time saw it not as a symbol of what I had lost, but as a testament to everything I had survived. The design was better now, stronger, more mature. The ordeal had taught me things about tension, about load-bearing structures, about the importance of a solid foundation, lessons that applied as much to wood as they did to life. I picked up a block of rich, dark walnut, the very same type of wood I had started with so long ago. Its surface was smooth and cool beneath my hands, filled with the silent promise of what it could become. In that moment, looking at the design on the table and the woman by my side, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I used to think that Chloe had taken everything from me, that she had stolen my work, my future, my heart. But I realized now, as I stood in the quiet hum of my own reclaimed sanctuary, that she had only ever managed to take the things that were never truly mine. To begin with, the hollow ambition, the fragile ego, the life built for appearances. What was left, what had endured the fire, was real. My skill, my integrity, and a true partner who valued my hands for the things they could build. That was my legacy, and I was finally ready to get back to work.